This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This Friday, see what critics are calling a cold-blooded masterpiece.
Hello, Finney.
You're dead.
Dead is just a word.
Did you think our story was over?
Discover the secret
He brought us here for a reason.
behind the mask.
What do you think happens when you die? It's time to find out.
Ethan Hawke,
I'm not afraid of you.
You should be.
Black Phone 2, only in theaters Friday. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent.
Hello and welcome to Gabfest Reads for the month of October 2025. I'm Emily Bazelon, one of the hosts of Slate's Political Gabfest. I'm here today with John Witt, who is a law professor at Yale and the author of the new book, The Radical Fund: How a Band of Visionaries and $1 Million Upended America. Hey, John.
Hi, Emily.
I'm so glad you're here. I have been hearing about this book in bits and pieces along the way and so enjoyed reading it. It is a book that is full of stories, historical stories that I did not know, and insights about the activism and social reform of the 1920s and 30s. It's kind of a prehistory of the civil rights movement and other struggles of the 1960s that at least I was more familiar with. The book starts with Charles Garland and his unwanted inheritance. So, John, who was Charles Garland and what happened when his grandfather tried to give him $1 million?
Charles Garland was a Harvard undergrad in the process of dropping out when he turned 21 and inherited what was left of a Civil War war bonds fortune. His grandfather had been an investment banker, had helped to create what is now the Citibank empire. And the money came down through a ne'er-do-well playboy father to young Charles in 1920, and Charles refused it. He looked around the world. He thought the world was unjustifiably unequal, and he said no. And because he was such a beautiful human being and had a gorgeous society wife, the press descended on his farm, his mother's farm in Cape Cod. They came from all around the country. Newspapers were filled with his story. And word leaked out, and Upton Sinclair and Roger Baldwin had just founded the ACLU, Sinclair, the famous muckraker from the first decade of the 20th century, got together and persuaded Garland to give them the money so they could give it away, and they did for the next 20 years.
Okay, so they established this Garland Fund, and this is at a time when there's already major philanthropy. The Carnegie and Rockefeller foundations exist, right? But this fund is different. What is this fund doing that nobody has done before?
Well, their project is to collect together all the people on the left side of the American political spectrum and to jumpstart the work that folks on the left were doing. The Rockefellers are giving away in any given week about as much as the Garland Fund ever had. So it's tiny in that sense. But it's the only game in town for left and liberal organizations, for labor unions, for the NAACP, for the ACLU. And what the fund ends up doing as a result is convening a conversation among a whole bunch of different kinds of people, and it helps produce a new set of strategies. It lets us see from a new angle what the strategies were that these organizations were adopting, and it also lets us see some of the new things that emerge.
So one of the people in your story who's part of all of this is James Weldon Johnson. I thought it might work to start with him and his thinking and his kind of position in this world as a way of understanding some of the specifics about what the fund was up to. So tell us about James Weldon Johnson and how was he thinking about how to address this enormous problem of his time of racism and racial discrimination?
Yeah, so I'll tell you about Johnson. I'm going to slide in A. Philip Randolph too, because
no, I him later.
Is that right? Well, they're both from Jacksonville, Florida. See, that's the exciting thing about them too. They're both together because so Johnson has just become the first Black director of the NAACP. Founded by Du Bois and Company a decade or so before, but run by white directors until 1920. And Johnson is this amazing polymath writer, a songwriter, lyricist, poet. A foreign service officer. I mean, an amazing character, teacher, lawyer. And Johnson is engaged in 1922 in the project of trying to get anti-lynching legislation passed. And he fails just as the fund is coming online. And he turns to the fund to do the new project of trying to change public opinion. Organizing public opinion and engaging in public opinion campaigns so that he can win battles like the anti-lynching legislation in the future. Eventually Johnson's going to be the initial architect of the campaign to Brown against Board of Education, and that's something that the fund sets in motion in 1929, 1930. But right alongside Johnson, now Randolph, if you don't mind.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Johnson grows up, born in Reconstruction, Jacksonville, Florida, a middle-class Black town run by African Americans, mostly formerly enslaved people. 10 years later, and Johnson watches Reconstruction Florida turn into Redemption Florida, and he watches the destruction of the democratic world of the Reconstruction era. Randolph is born after the fall of Reconstruction, and he's born into a poor family in Jacksonville. And when he makes his way to New York City, about 10 years after Johnson does, he brings a new project to Harlem and to New York, and the fund latches on to Randolph's idea, which is not just civil rights, but also class-based organizing, workers and Black workers in particular. And much of the magic of the fund is in bringing together Johnson's civil rights orientation with Randolph's class orientation.
And so when you're talking about this class and race mix, I think one of the strands here is that there are these white-led unions, and they are advocating for workers, but really only for white workers. And there's an enormous amount of discrimination against Black workers. Is that part of what Johnson and Randolph are trying to address?
Yeah, I mean, lots of the most important labor unions of the era have whites-only provisions written into their charters. And if they don't have them written into their charters, they practice Jim Crow unionism anyway. And what Randolph persuades the Garland Fund to do is to invest in the project of organizing Black workers. And we see one of the great archival, and I spent 13 years in the archives on this, and some of the key archival documents for me were the ones at the very beginning of the Brown against Board of Education campaign in 1929, 1930, in which people like Du Bois, Johnson, writing to the fund, are talking about the value, the power of organizing Black workers as a crucial step towards organizing the working class in America generally.
Okay, so what's the connection here to Brown? I mean, Brown is about education and segregation in schools, and you're talking about something different. You're talking about labor organizing. Are Johnson and Randolph intertwining those two issues? Are they related to each other in legal cases in court?
Great. This was one of the puzzles that I had to work out to make sense of what was going on. And the key for me became when I realized that the Jim Crow Southern states before the New Deal are developing the New South. They're spending more and more money on public projects. And a central public project is the public school. That is, the New South is building schools. They're pumping resources into them. But Johnson and Du Bois use funding from the Garland Fund to study the wild ratios, 6-to-1, 10-to-1, 12-to-1 of funding from white schools to Black schools. And so the beginning of school litigation is an effort to grab resources and pump them into the Black community while also building civil rights such that Black workers, if on picket lines, could insist and defend their rights. So the schools and the economic piece ran together for those two reasons at least, and still more.
Okay, that makes sense. And can you talk a little bit more about the labor organizing part? Because One of the aspects, I think, of Randolph's work, but also the work of some of the white union leaders, is this concept of an industrial union, right? That's not going to divide people according to like the particular craft or trade they practice, but is going to be a kind of broader way of thinking about workers and their interests as opposed to management, trying to make labor more powerful by having it more broadly united, right? And how are they going about that?
So the center of gravity of the fund was a man named Sidney Hillman and his lieutenants. And Sidney Hillman, in the early 20s, is the leader of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. It's an early industrial union. Not the earliest. Ideas about industrial unions had gone back into the 19th century. The Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world, were a particular radical form of industrial unionizing. They said one big union. That was their motto. And what Hillman does is take the energy of that early radicalism and see that the one big union, the industrial union, is well matched to the mass consumer capitalism, the huge size of the mass production firms of the 1920s. And so through the 20s, the Garland Fund sponsors a set of labor intellectuals, economists, technocrats, organizers who design, argue about, and theorize what the industrial union should be. And as a result, when the Depression crashes down on the American economy, and when labor starts to have a moment in the sun and a moment of possibility, those lieutenants of Hillman, the people funded by the Garland Fund for a decade, are ready to go out into the countryside, out into the cities, out into the factories, and do the work of organizing on that new industrial union basis.
And does that change class relations in America? Like, how does the Great Depression is happening? Unemployment is skyrocketing. Things are really bad in the United States. But is this model of labor organizing part of trying to get more of a share of the pie for workers?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the 1920s are a down moment for American labor unions. The membership in the American Federation of Labor, then the flagship organization, the AFL, is declining across the 1920s. Unions are back on their heels, and by the time we get to the post-World War II moment, unions have, in the private sector, more than a third of American workers are members of labor unions. And so that, explaining that transformation and the way in which unions see a huge surge in membership is part of what I wanted to get at. And economists have done wonderful studies in the last couple of years about the way in which labor union membership at mid-century helped to drive equality. The Thomas Piketty and other economists who've got the U-shaped curves of inequality from the 1920s into the 2020s. And that mid-century moment is a moment of much more economic equality in the United States. And labor unions played a big part in driving that.
This episode of Gabfest Reads is sponsored by Quince. As the weather cools, it is time to swap in transitional layers that actually get the job done. It's gotten quite cool here in Washington this week. And today, I brought up my new Quince sweater, super cozy. It's a little bit stretchy, a little bit warm. I love the feel around my neck. And I also am wearing my new Quince jeans, which look great. My girlfriend has been hassling me to get new jeans, and I got some new Quince jeans, and they look great. Quince has all the fall staples you'll want to wear and repeat. Like 100% Mongolian cashmere from just $60 and classic fit denim, like the kind I'm wearing right now. Their real leather and wool outerwear looks sharp and holds up. Layer up this fall with pieces that feel as good as they look. Go to quince.com/gabfestreads for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/gabfestreads. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/gabfestreads. This Gabfest Reads is sponsored by Cornbread Hemp. Life can get a little crazy, a little chaotic at times. So if you're looking for a natural way to unwind, a way that can also relieve aches and discomfort, it might be time to try CBD gummies from Cornbread Hemp. Cornbread Hemp CBD gummies are made to help you feel better, whether it's stress, discomfort, or just needing a little relaxation. And they only use the best part of the hemp plant, the flower, for the purest and most potent CBD. All products are third-party lab tested and USDA organic to ensure safety and purity. And right now, Gabfest listeners can save 30% on their first order. Just head to cornbreadhemp.com/Gabfest and use code GABFEST at checkout. That's cornbreadhemp.com/Gabfest, code GABFEST.
The detective said missing kids usually come home. What happens when they don't?
Based on a true story.
Police looking for John Gacy.
We discovered bodies. By the looks of it, they're younger men.
The things he did to those kids. He's sick.
The system failed these families.
Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Do you know how many there are?
Up to you to find out.
Every drop of Jack Daniel's is mellowed through sugar maple charcoal, giving Jack its smooth taste. That's what makes Jack, Jack.
Please drink responsibly. Jack Daniel's and Old No. 7 are registered trademarks. Tennessee whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Jack Daniel Distillery, Lynchburg, Tennessee.
Tonight, turn down the noise of the day and focus on the rest with AGZ, the nightly drink for winding down and resting up. New from AG1. AGZ supports your body's natural sleep cycle with clinically studied key herbs, adaptogens, and minerals in amounts supported by research. And no melatonin, helping you wake feeling rested. Wind down, rest up with AGZ. Learn more at drinkagz.com.
One thing that really leaped out at me from your book is that I was familiar with Franklin Roosevelt's contributions during the Depression, all the New Deal era legislation, making labor law somewhat more hospitable to union organizing. But then it was like your characters were the people who made actually the change happen on the ground, that was taking advantage of some of those legal changes and also just really pushing things forward. Is that a persuasive way to think about it?
Totally. And Senator Robert Wagner in New York, who's the key political actor in driving the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, named after him, is drawing on a brain trust of people who came out of this world in the 20s. You could think of what the fund does is it's a kind of incubator organization that incubates progressivism during the lean years of the 20s. A period of one-party control of the government in which the so-called progressives of the pre-World War I era are in exile. And where do they go in exile? They go to the shelter, the incubator of this fund, and work on ideas that'll work in what was for them a better future.
Okay, and that's a pretty good segue to the present, when we are having another moment in which I think a lot of progressives are feeling in exile, or at least very worried about the United States and its future. So you write that once again today, the United States needs to find ways to empower working class people to defend their economic interests, to connect rather than divide them. What are the lessons you see here? If you were starting the Garland Fund now and had maybe more money, maybe you would need more money, what would you do with it to try to build up civil society?
Yeah, well, let's talk at some point, in a minute or two, about the size of this fund and how much money would be required. That's really important stuff. One of the ways to think about this, the excitement of this project, I think, is this is a moment when, from that moment of exile, liberals and progressives organized themselves and had really exciting ideas and got energetic and energized around a set of organizing projects. I feel, Emily, that during our lifetimes, liberals have been back on their heels. That is to say, defending a set of institutions, projects that got put into place. Lots of great progress and also lots of real reversals during our lifetime. But there's a way in which the project has been to defend a set of accomplishments, and we could even see that in some of the core flagship organizations of our time on the progressive side are the NAACP and the ACLU. Where do they come from? They come out of this 20s moment. Or the AFL-CIO. Where does that come from? The CIO piece comes out of this 20s moment. So what I'd love to do is have this book inspire people now in political exile to try to move from a position of being back on our heels to thinking forward. and thinking about the future. Now I'm a historian, so I also take refuge in the fund in the 20s. But that's the idea. You asked specific questions. We should jump into those, but I wanted to put that background out there.
Well, right. I think one of the lessons of what you're saying is that you can't just repeat the moves that the fund made, because that's defending. There may be some backsliding to address along the way, but you're imagining a kind of new forward-thinking vision. I am curious whether you feel like there's some obvious, at least like points of reference that all your research has shown.
Yeah, I love this idea. And one thing is, is the industrial union, is it the right? It was designed for mass production firms and huge production floors. That was its genius, was to connect together the carpenters and the machinists and the electricians across a huge production floor who are ranged across ethnicity, across race, and to bring them together into one powerful organizing unit, essentially that would be partners with their employers in the direction of American capitalism. But now you think of the gig economy and virtual work. You think of the future of AI, and one wonders whether what exactly the economic form will be that will bring people together. Another thing, a reason to focus on the industrial union is, we talk about liberalism in the 20th century as having produced rights, but what it was doing in the 30s was producing power. It was producing power and wealth, and those are the, I think, relevant characteristics for a future-oriented American liberalism.
One new way of thinking in the labor movement about power is this idea of sectoral bargaining, right? So it's related to the industrial union in the sense that it's trying to unify workers across categories, but it's a way of having, everyone in the fast food industry get behind, the fight for a $15 minimum wage or some kind of concessions from the giant corporations that run fast food chains. Is that the kind of innovation, building on the past, but also moving it forward, that you have in mind?
Yeah, I think sectoral bargaining is sectoral organizing, sectoral bargaining are really exciting, innovative ideas for reorganizing the units of capitalism. That's really what we're talking about, is reorganizing the units of the economy insofar as ordinary people are participating in them and shaping them. And sectoral bargaining is really one great example. There are other experiments on the horizon and already in our world. I think of efforts to organize around debt, or organizing as tenants. These are other categories of organizing. There's efforts to organize around, for example, rights to healthcare. There's a whole bunch of, our economy is different. We have different set of economic conditions. Our landscape is different. And each one of those holds promise and has real pitfalls. There are no panaceas in that mix. But there are a whole bunch of things on offer. I think one of the things on offer is, let's think of it as abundance economics. It's one of the major candidates for where liberalism should be, and has lots of overlap with what Sidney Hillman was doing in the prosperity-oriented unions that he had in the 20s and 30s.
So I'm going to slightly change the subject, because another thing that struck me as a parallel for today is the focus the fund had on misinformation and propaganda, right? Really trying to change the information ecosystem. They felt at the time that the media organs of the 1920s were not serving the interests of the people they cared about. And they were very deliberate in trying to fund alternatives. Tell us a little bit about that work and how you see that as potentially having a parallel now.
Well, the fund comes out of this post-World War I period in which a whole bunch of sophisticated, thoughtful people, the young Walter Lippmann, chief among them, are thinking about the power of propaganda. Woodrow Wilson turned the country around from having been reelected in 1916 on a "I kept the country out of war" platform to less than 6 months later getting the Congress to declare war and having to turn the country on a hairpin. And that propaganda campaign that he unleashes is unbelievably powerful. And everyone's observing it and seeing the capacity of states and big companies to organize public opinion in the moment. And so, Lippmann's arresting image is that the world out there is different from the pictures in our heads, and the media is what intermediates. It's what comes in between, and gives us ideas about what's going on out there in the world. Lippmann is really focused on this problem of the press in a democracy, and so are others like W.E.B. Du Bois, is again one of the great propaganda theorists of the 20th century. And it looks, Emily, pulled right out of the pages of today. I mean, it's, social media is different, and AI generated videos are different. The forms are different. And I saw in the comment section in a piece I just published in the Times earlier this week, lots of claims that, oh no, it's much different and much worse now. But if you read Du Bois and Lippmann, they're describing different phenomena, but the same basic abstract problem of how to do information in a democracy.
And so what do we take from them? Like, do you just fund a bunch of alternative media outlets that are doing things differently? I mean, we are in this world of social media and AI-generated content, and it sometimes feels to me that the challenge is less censorship, or in addition to censorship, this problem of just like being inundated with a lot of false and misleading information. And I remain confused about what to do.
Well, right. So, I mean, Lippmann is one of the early people to see that censorship is not, at the end of the day, the real problem. I mean, it's kind of amazing. He's seeing this in 1919. He says the real problem is the channels of information are filled with misinformation. And censorship is only one, to his mind, small piece of it. I'm a reader of people like Tim Wu and Chris Hayes, who've said the problem isn't scarcity of speech now, it's scarcity of attention. And so that's a transformation from a century ago. And so the solutions seem to me are much more likely to come on the attention side rather than on the speech production side. I mean, the podcast explosion stands for the proposition that it's really easy to talk and put your voice out there. The problem is getting anyone to pay attention. And there are some interesting solutions on the horizon for that, I think, although all tentative and more hopeful than real yet.
Well, I feel like you should say one more beat about what they may be, other than everyone listening to our podcast, obviously. Of
course that. Well, NewsGuard. Do you know NewsGuard? This is a kind of interesting outfit here. I'm plugging an outfit I don't really know much about. I don't know the people involved. But NewsGuard is trying to figure out how to reorganize ad buying in the digital space to drive ads away from dangerous, scurrilous misinformation content towards stuff that's responsible. And right now, the way online ad auctions happen is just disastrous for our information environment. And that's the kind of Lippmann-inspired way of reorganizing our information space that might hold some promise.
Last couple questions. So the fund had a big commitment to spending itself down, right? Not to just going on in perpetuity, which is one of the reasons why most of us have never heard of it, because they actually just kind of wound down. How did that happen? What kind of legacy did people see at the time for all this effort?
Yeah, so Garland himself fades from the organization mostly. And he ends up having a complicated midlife and later life story. He has some mental illness issues, and the book follows his story. But his main significance in running the fund is to demand that Baldwin and Johnson and the other directors, Hillman and company, adopt the spend down structure. Because all of them in this group are unsure what they think about the use of wealth to solve the problems which they think are attributable to unequal wealth. And so there's a kind of hypocrisy problem they're all struggling with through their 2 decades of work. And so they resolve on spend down as one way to commit to a certain kind of not exploiting the advantages of their wealth. And so they spend it all down. And they also, the crash in 1929 does away with a lot of what's left by the time they get to that. So mostly it's in a 1 decade period, they spend about $2 million, which, $40 million if you index for inflation. So that's the scale, and that's their spend down strategy.
I wanted to close by asking a question to tell us a story of an internal fight among the different groups involved with the fund. One of the things about the present and any time when one is living through history is that there are all these internecine factional battles that go on, and they seem incredibly frustrating and energy sapping and worrisome. And then when you look back in history, it's easy to kind of gloss over them and just imagine everyone like getting along and holding hands and uniting as they move forward. But one of the terrific things about your book is that there are a bunch of these internal fights among communists and liberals, for example, and other kinds of factions. So tell me your favorite story of internal dissension within the fund.
Well, there's a way in which the climactic moment in the story is a parliamentary battle. I don't know how many books make their climactic moment a parliamentary battle, but Emily, I thought it was gripping, and it's a battle between the Hillman civil rights faction on the center left of this foundation on the one hand, and the communist left that has quietly developed over the course of the 1920s. I say quietly on purpose. They've added members who are party affiliates in an effort to take over the foundation. It was a common strategy. It's called boring from within. And William Z. Foster, one of the leading American communists, is the chief architect of the boring from within strategy for a bunch of organizations. And there he is. So what does he do? He bores from within. And in 1929 and 1930, there are two big visions for how race emancipation should work in the United States. And the Communist Party has begun to sponsor what they call the Black Belt, which would be the idea of self-determination, self-governing southern states in a sickle-shaped arc from Virginia down through Mississippi that would be Black-governed communities. And there's both a glorious long tradition of Black self-determination in this story, and there's also a cynical Stalin-driven story about Soviet communist tactics. But against this Black Belt theory are James Weldon Johnson and a bunch of other directors pushing for an attack on Jim Crow that would transform the existing jurisdictions of the United States. And that battle, that's the battle that produces Brown against Board of Education. I mean, it comes right out of that a quarter century later. I'll let your listeners, read through the machinations and the struggles and the heroism and sometimes the, really bad action and dastardly behavior that leads to that.
Yeah, I love this part of the book. It was in its own way kind of reassuring to me that these towering historical figures were dealing with some of the same clashes and even, even pettiness that seems so frustrating today.
Right. And before people had, group chats and other sort of Slack and all the different ways we communicate with one another now, when things get ugly, they're working it out by letters.
Exactly. Yes. John, thank you so much for this conversation. The book is The Radical Fund. Congratulations on it.
Thank you, Emily. It's been so much fun talking.
That's it for this month's edition of Gabfest Reads. Our producer is Nina Porzucki. Ben Richmond is Senior Director of Operations of Podcasts. Mia Lobel is the Executive Director of Podcasts at Slate. And Hillary Fry is the Editor-in-Chief at Slate. John Dickerson will be back next month with another edition of Gabfest Reads. Until then, all of us, John and David and I, will be back in your feed on Thursday with a new episode of the Slate Political Gabfest. Thanks so much for listening.
Hear that? The next chapter of Audi performance is here. That's the sound of every interior detail refined. And that's the sound of Quattro all-wheel drive. The all-new Audi Q5, the all-new A5, and Q7. Each one a statement. Performance never goes out of style.